Not familiar with this case, Joseph Lyle Menendez and Eric Menendez, they are brothers who were convicted of murdering their parents, Jose and Mary Louise Menendez. This was at their Beverly Hills home back in 1989. So initially, after the murders, Eric and Lyle claimed that some unknown intruders were responsible for the killing. But again, at the end of the case, police did eventually find out that they were responsible for their deaths. So we want to go ahead and now get into what this now means that the DA, George Gascon, who recently recommended that resentencing in this case, lost his election to Nathan Hochman. Let's now bring in legal analyst Nima Rahmani to get into this conversation. Nima, thank you so much for being with us here on Live Now. Again, this is fascinating because so many people across the nation seem like they're glued to their TVs trying to get the latest update on the Menendez brothers. Initially, what are your thoughts now that you hear that the DA who recommended resentencing has now lost this election?
Christina, this is a huge development because we know that George Gascon recommended resentencing in the interest of justice, but he's on his way out. So the timing here is everything. There's two separate things that are happening on parallel tracks. First, there's a habeas petition that the Menendez brothers' lawyers filed, and that petition is going to be heard by a judge named William Ryan on November 25th. The reason that's important is that Gascon will still be in office, but Nathan Hochman is going to be sworn in on December 2nd, and the petition for resentencing in the interest of justice is going to be heard by an entirely different judge on December 11th, when Hochman will be in office and Gascon will no longer be there. So the question is, will the new district attorney honor their request? He's certainly a lot tougher on crime, and it's not certain that he will.
And when you're thinking about previous cases like this, when one judge or one, I should say, district attorney recommends resentencing, is it often that their ideals will carry over just in the interest of the public support potentially? Will that have an impact as well?
Every district attorney in this country is elected, so public support does matter. It's the political reality, but Nathan Hochman has a very different stance on crime than George Gascon. George Gascon was probably one of the most soft on crimes district attorneys in the country, and that's why he was voted out of office overwhelmingly. Now, Hochman, a former Republican turned independent, has a different view. Now, he said that he's going to review the Menendez brothers case and make a decision, but he certainly is not obligated to honor that resentencing request. And even though the public support seems to be overwhelming in support of Eric and Lyle being released, in large part because of the Netflix series Monsters that talked about the sexual abuse they suffered at the hands of their father, I'm not so certain that Hochman is going to honor that request. And if so, we may be seeing a situation where he pulls that resentencing recommendation.
And that's interesting, Nima. I do want to let you know that, of course, he did say he wanted to, like you said, review those facts before he makes any decisions. But he did say that if he can't fully feel like he's coming to the right decision ahead of time, he could ask the judge for a delay. What does that process usually look like as well?
So let's talk about the habeas petition. That will be heard. Now, the argument there is that because the sexual abuse didn't come into the second trial, that the brothers' constitutional rights were violated. It's a tough argument because you really have to show that the result would have been different. And it's really unclear that the murder would have been reduced to manslaughter because it was really premeditated. Eric and Lyle shot their parents in the back of the head while they were eating ice cream and watching TV. And even if you can argue self-defense with respect to the father, Jose, I think it's a much tougher argument with respect to the mother, Kitty, even though allegedly she was complicit in some of this. So I think that hearing is going to move forward. But you're right, the second hearing, which is the resentencing hearing, that can be pushed out weeks or even months if Hochman and his new team needs more time to review the case.
And I do think that's so interesting that you brought up the dynamic between the two parents. Again, like you said, you can have that argument. I think there's always been that floated out there that Kitty is sort of the focus of this case and why these brothers ended up behind bars ultimately. Do you feel like that's kind of the case where it just looks different between the type of motivation that they had behind these murders, which again is what led them to being behind bars for so long?
Matters a lot. You know, under California law, if you're convicted of first degree murder, there's special circumstances, which there were here. That's a mandatory life case without the possibility of parole. Obviously, with the death penalty in California, there's been a moratorium for quite some time, but there's no opportunity to get out. So I think what the defense is trying to do here is kind of pigeonhole the facts of this case. And I understand the sympathy for the brothers as victims of sex abuse, but it doesn't really fit within the four corners of self defense law. The argument is that the brothers feared for their life, and if they outed their father, he would kill them. Again, I don't think it's a particularly good argument. I understand the argument, but even if you buy that argument, it certainly doesn't relate to Kitty necessarily, even though she may have groomed the brothers and helped cover up the abuse. That's the challenge here. The law is not on Eric and Lyle's side, even though sympathy and justice may be.
Do the brothers have any other path to get out of jail other, of course, than the DA recommending resentencing and just adjusting their time that they're going to be spending behind bars?
They do not. They only have two options here: a request by the prosecution to reduce their sentence. Obviously, they can petition Governor Newsom for a pardon or to commute their sentence. That would be another option. But legally speaking, they've exhausted all their appeals and they've done so many, many years ago. So now they're trying to collaterally attack the conviction through a habeas petition, which judges can grant, but they're rarely granted. You need to show a constitutional violation, and you also need to show prejudice that the result of the case would have been different. And again, I think the challenge is even if you're sexually abused, it doesn't give you a license to kill in the United States, in any state in this country. And that's the problem that the defense has here.
I think that's very interesting the way you put it. Again, not a license to kill. It doesn't seem like under the law. Nima, before I let you go, I just want to ask you this. Of course, you're in California. This was a case that happened so many years ago. Are you surprised that the public is so interested in this, or do you think that's sort of the magic of Netflix and these documentaries that come out to highlight these things years and years after they happen?
Christina, you called it. I've been born and raised, and I've spent my entire life in Southern California. I never in a million years thought that there would be any possibility that Eric and Lyle would be released. And I may be having lunch or dinner sitting next to them here in Los Angeles. But like you said, it just really shows the power of a Netflix series. And we've seen it time and time again how a documentary can completely reshape and change the trajectory of a legal case. Britney Spears was released from a conservatorship because of the many documentaries. We saw R. Kelly brought to justice because of surviving R. Kelly. We saw the Abercrombie and Finch former CEO who was charged because of a BBC documentary, Bob Durst, an HBO documentary, The Jinx. I mean, there's so many different cases. And of course, now the most recent one, the Netflix series Monsters. So, I think the defense can thank them for the sympathy and the light that has been shined on the sexual abuse that they suffered.
And for folks like me, who I was born and raised in Georgia, had no concept of this case at all. So it also introduces another generation to this case that's just captured Americans all over the country. So very interesting. Again, Nima Rahmani, a legal analyst, here to break down the potential outcome that we could see again on the other side with this Menendez brothers case, now that there will be a new district attorney. Thanks so much for being with us, Nima.
Oh, thanks for having me, Christina.